In a small village, tucked beside a dense forest, and far from the busy cities of the kingdom, lived a young woman named Elena. Her home was simple, with wooden beams that creaked when the wind blew through the cracks. She often found herself staring out over the village, watching the smoke rise from chimneys as the people went about their work. The cobblestone streets and little wooden houses were nice, but Elena longed for something more. Elena was known for her beauty. Her golden hair shimmered in the sunlight like wheat swaying in a breeze, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with dreams of far-off lands. She moved with grace, like a dancer, drawing the attention of every man she passed. However, Elena cared little for the attention she received. Her heart was set on something bigger than village life, something beyond the steady rhythm of the days. She wanted to explore, to see the world. It was late in the afternoon, and Elena sat by the river. The cool water reflected the sky, turning it into a mirror of pale blue and soft pinks as the sun began to set. She dipped her fingers in the water and let it flow around them. The sounds of birds singing filled the air, but Elena was lost in her thoughts. "Someday, I'll leave this place," she whispered to herself. "I want to see what's beyond the mountains, across the seas, to the cities with tall walls and people from different lands." She closed her eyes, imagining what it would be like to walk among strangers, to meet travelers from places she had never heard of. Her thoughts were interrupted when she heard the soft rustle of footsteps behind her. She turned to see her best friend, Greta, walking toward her with a smile on her face. "You're thinking about leaving again, aren't you?" Greta asked, sitting down beside her. Greta was a sweet girl, with dark brown hair that framed her face in soft waves. She had always been Elena's confidant, even if her heart was more attached to the comfort of home. Elena nodded. "I can't stop thinking about it. I want to go out into the world, Greta. I want to see it all." Greta's smile faded a little. "I understand. I know you want to explore, but I can't help but worry. There's so much danger out there. What if something happens to you?" Elena turned to look at her best friend, her blue eyes soft. "I can take care of myself, Greta. I'm not afraid." Greta sighed, but didn't argue. She knew Elena's heart was set. "I suppose I can't stop you, but promise me you'll be careful. And don't forget about the village. Don't forget about me." Elena smiled and reached out to squeeze Greta's hand. "I will. You'll always be my friend, no matter where I go." The two sat in silence for a while, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Elena felt at peace with her decision. She had made up her mind. She would leave the village. But where would she go? That was still a question she hadn't answered. The next morning, the village was busy as usual. The men worked in the fields, the women tended to their homes and shops, and children ran through the streets laughing. But there was something new in the air that day. The inn had a visitor, and everyone was talking about him. Elena had heard whispers of his arrival as she passed through the market. "He's different," someone had said. "He's been to places we've never heard of." Curiosity tugged at her, and as she wandered through the village square, Elena couldn't help but glance toward the inn. There, standing at the door, was a man she had never seen before. He was tall, with dark, almost black hair that fell to his shoulders. His clothes were well made, but worn, as though he had traveled a long way. His eyes were the color of the forest, deep green, and they seemed to hold a secret. He didn't look like the men from the village, who were rough and simple. This man looked different. There was something in the way he stood, calm and confident, as though he belonged to no place, but had seen it all. As Elena passed by, their eyes met for just a moment. He gave her a small nod, and she couldn't help but feel a strange pull in her chest. There was something about him, something that made her feel as if she wanted to know more. "Who's that?" Elena asked a nearby villager. "His name is Gustav," the woman replied. "He's a traveler, they say, been to many places, far beyond our village." Gustav. Elena repeated the name in her mind, feeling a mix of curiosity and excitement. Who was he really? And what was he doing in their little village? A few days later, Elena found herself walking to the inn on an errand for her father. He had asked her to deliver a message to the innkeeper, and as she entered the inn, she saw Gustav sitting near the fire. He looked up as she approached, his green eyes meeting hers again. "Good afternoon," Elena said, her voice slightly nervous. "I'm here to speak with the innkeeper. My father sent me." Gustav stood up and nodded. "I'm sure he's around," he said politely, his voice low and calm. "Let me take the message to him for you." Elena hesitated, surprised by his kindness. "Thank you." As he walked away, Elena couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort. She had expected him to be distant, but he was warm, approachable, and more than a little intriguing. He returned shortly and handed her a small note. "Here you go. I hope your father's work is going well." "Thank you," Elena replied, still unsure of what to make of him. "Are you staying in the village for long?" Gustav smiled slightly. "I'm not sure. I travel wherever the road takes me. Perhaps I'll leave tomorrow, or perhaps I'll stay a while longer. I'm not in a rush." Elena smiled, feeling a pull in her chest once more. There was something comforting about his calmness, something that made her want to ask more questions. But she held back, not wanting to seem too forward. Instead, she gave a small wave and left the inn. Later that night, Elena sat by the fire at home, thinking about her conversation with Gustav. She couldn't help but wonder about him. There was something about his quiet, mysterious nature that intrigued her. "Are you still thinking about him?" Greta's voice interrupted Elena's thoughts. Elena turned to see Greta sitting across from her, her hands busy with some sewing. Elena had always been close to Greta, even though their lives were so different. Greta was content with her quiet life in the village, while Elena felt a restlessness that never seemed to go away. "I'm thinking about leaving, Greta," Elena said softly. "I've made up my mind." Greta looked at her, her eyes full of concern. "Leave? But where will you go? What if something happens?" Elena sighed. "I don't know yet, but I have to go. I need to see the world. I need to know what's out there." Greta reached out and took her hand. "I understand, but promise me you'll be careful." Elena smiled softly. "I will. I'll be careful. I'll always come back. I promise." That night, as Elena lay in bed, she felt a sense of peace. She had made her decision. She would leave the village, and nothing would stop her. As the days passed, Elena found herself thinking more and more about Gustav. She had never met anyone like him before. His quiet nature and the way he spoke about far-off lands made her wonder what it would be like to travel with him. But she still had many questions. Who was he really? Where did he come from? Why did he travel alone? One evening, as she was walking through the village square, she saw him again. He was sitting outside the inn, looking out at the setting sun. The golden light of evening painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. Elena felt a sudden urge to speak with him, so she took a deep breath and walked over. "Good evening, Gustav," she said, trying to sound casual, though her heart was beating faster than usual. He turned to her and smiled. "Good evening, Elena. You're out late." "I was just thinking," she said, sitting down beside him. "I've been wondering about you. You've traveled so much. Tell me, what's it like?" Gustav's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He looked out at the horizon, and for a moment, Elena thought he might not answer. But then he spoke. "It's different everywhere you go. Some places are beautiful, full of life and stories. Others are quiet and lonely. But all of them are new, and that makes it worth it." Elena nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. "It sounds wonderful, but also a little scary. How do you do it?" Gustav looked at her then, his green eyes serious. "You have to be brave. But you also have to learn how to trust the road and trust yourself. Elena smiled, feeling a sense of connection to him. It was a small conversation, but something inside her told her that it was the beginning of something important. She wasn't sure what, but she felt that she could trust Gustav. The next morning, Elena woke early, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew it was time. She had made the decision to leave the village, and nothing was going to change her mind. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was what she had to do. She walked down the narrow cobblestone street toward her family's home, where her father was already at the forge. He was working on a large piece of iron, his hammer striking it with rhythmic precision. "Father," Elena called softly, walking up to him. "Can we talk?" Her father looked up, wiping his brow. "Of course, Elena. What's on your mind?" Elena took a deep breath. "I've decided to leave, Father. I want to travel, see the world." Her father paused, his eyes narrowing as he set down his hammer. He knew his daughter well. She had always been full of dreams, bigger than the small village life could offer. "You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you?" he asked, his voice calm. "Yes," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly. "I know it won't be easy, but it's what I need to do." Her father studied her for a long moment, his face serious. "You're my daughter, Elena, and I want you to be safe. The world can be a dangerous place. But if this is what you truly want, I won't stop you. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" Elena asked, her heart in her throat. "Promise me you'll come back," he said simply. "No matter where you go, you always have a place here with us." Tears welled up in Elena's eyes as she nodded. "I promise, Father. I'll always come back." She turned to leave, but before she could step away, her father's voice called after her. "Be careful, Elena, and remember that you don't have to face the world alone. There are good people everywhere." Elena smiled through her tears, feeling a mixture of sadness and excitement. She had said goodbye to her family, and now she was ready to begin the journey that would change her life forever. Elena met Gustav at the edge of the village just as the sun was rising. The air was crisp and cool, and the sky was painted with soft pinks and oranges. She felt a sense of adventure stir inside her, but also a twinge of nervousness. What was ahead? She had no idea. Gustav was already prepared. His bag was packed, and he was wearing a weathered coat, sturdy boots, and a leather belt that held a knife at his side. Elena felt a rush of both excitement and fear as she approached him. "Are you ready?" Gustav asked, his green eyes studying her face. Once we leave, there's no turning back. Elena nodded. I'm ready. The two of them walked into the forest together, the trees towering over them as they made their way deeper into the woods. The forest was quiet, but there was an underlying hum of life all around them. Birds chirped in the distance, and the air smelled of pine and earth. As they walked, Gustav talked about the places he had been. He spoke of large cities filled with people from all over the world, of strange lands where the sun never seemed to set, and of mountains so tall they seemed to touch the sky. Elena listened, hanging on every word, her imagination running wild with the possibilities. But the forest was not without its dangers. As the day wore on, the weather grew colder, and the wind began to howl through the trees. The path grew narrower and more difficult to follow. You need to be careful, Gustav said, pointing to the ground ahead. There are animals in these woods. We should be alert. Elena nodded, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. She had never been this far from the village, and the idea of facing wild animals made her heart race. But at the same time, she felt stronger. She was out here, on her own, taking her first steps towards something bigger than she had ever known. That evening, after a long day of walking, they found a spot by a small river and set up camp. The fire crackled in front of them, casting dancing shadows on the trees. Elena sat close to the fire, her hands warming as she watched the flames. She felt tired, but also alive in a way she had never felt before. The journey had only just begun, but already she could feel a change inside her. Gustav sat across from her, quietly tending to the fire. For a while, neither of them spoke. The crackling of the fire and the sound of the river flowing were the only noises that filled the night. Finally, Elena spoke. Gustav, can I ask you something? He looked up at her, his green eyes meeting hers. Of course. What made you start traveling? Elena asked softly. Why do you do it? Gustav's gaze turned distant, and for a moment, Elena wondered if he would answer. But then he sighed and spoke. I travel because I need to. The world has so many stories to tell, and I want to see them all. I don't belong in one place for too long. If I stay, I feel trapped. Elena listened closely. I understand. I've always felt like there was something more waiting for me, something beyond the village. Gustav smiled, though it was a sad smile. Then you're like me, always searching for something new. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone in her dreams. Now, from this point, the story will be continued in the next part.